Accordingly, this enterprise should be initiated and led by a syndicate of institutions, some 50 of which already exist worldwide, known as independent fiscal institutions. Of these, the Congressional Budget Office in the United States is the biggest and best known. But alongside, the Office for Budget Responsibility in the United Kingdom, the network of independent fiscal institutions in the European Union, and the parliamentary budget offices in Canada, Australia, South Africa and elsewhere are also well known. Many of these are established in and by the G20. But, and this is absolutely critical, they are neither controlled by the G20 nor by the individual G20 governments which established them. They are independent, many of them fiercely so. Granted, their founding purpose was not to supply global risk analysis. Instead, it was to supply various forms of domestic fiscal analysis. Nevertheless, and despite the variation in their mandates, all of them are required in some shape or form to supply analysis of the principal risks confronting their domestic fiscal institutions. And as we have seen, particularly in the last couple of decades, by far the greatest source of such risk is the global environment. The independent fiscal institutions have been well aware of this fact. But their approach to date to analysis of global risks as input into their domestic fiscal work has left much to be desired. Start with the fact that they have conducted this analysis independently of one another, producing enormous amounts of duplication and redundancy in a context where they all complain bitterly of resource constraints. Furthermore, many of them lean heavily on published IMF work for their analysis of the global outlook. But as argued extensively in this presentation, and given that such analysis focuses primarily on the central case rather than on risks, that is a slender reed on which to hang such work. Moreover, the founding purpose at a conceptual level of these institutions was to supply independent analysis. So, for them to rely so heavily on the G20-controlled IMF for such a central ingredient of their analysis represents a fundamental contradiction of their founding purpose, which was independence. And the upshot of all of this is reflected in that chart which I showed you earlier, prepared by the Congressional Budget Office in 2006 for the decade-ahead outlook for US federal government debt. If the independent fiscal institutions want to avoid a repeat of such a Michael Fish moment in their work, with its attendant hit to the integrity of their work, to their reputations, and to their credibility, they need to upgrade substantially their approach to analysis of global risks. What I'm proposing, specifically, is that they cooperate with one another, formally, as a syndicate, on an ongoing basis, to prepare global risk analysis. Were they to do so on the basis of the proposals for the substance of such work which I summarized earlier, they would address all of the shortcomings in their present approach which I have just outlined. Moreover, doing so would leverage the fact that they already cover the bulk of the G20 economy, which is, as we have seen, the primary source of global catastrophic risk. And they would leverage the fact that collectively they command far greater analytical resources than are available even to the IMF. So, for example, whereas the IMF devotes a grand total of 2 full-time staff to analysis of the United States, who at any time have an average time in post of just a year and a half, the Congressional Budget Office assigns fully 250 staff to that endeavour, most of whom have spent their entire professional careers studying the United States. Such formal cooperation between the independent fiscal institutions would be new for them. So it would require some innovations in organisation and institutional arrangements by them. In addition, it would require them to supplement their analytical resources in some spheres, notably regarding the financial sector and China. The latter simply because China does not have its own independent fiscal institution to cooperate with such an enterprise. But all this is eminently doable.